On September the 2nd, 1945, as a part of its terms of surrender, the Japanese government agreed to be under the control of the Allied powers. On December the 15th of that same year, the Allied powers issued the Shinto Directive. It banned the Japanese government from directly supporting shrines, banned mandatory shrine visits and worships, and banned the Japanese government from propagating its ideas through Shinto shrines. This was a part of a larger effort to dismantle Japanese ultranationalism and authoritarian regime, as well as spreading the ideas of freedom of religion and the separation of church and state. And in this effort, they were largely successful. However, there were a group of people that believed that the wartime treaties had severely weakened Japan, and that in order for it to reach its true potential, the Japanese government needed to shake off its wartime treaties and revise its wartime constitution. This sentiment grew after the asset bubble popped in the 1990s, and the Japanese economy entered a period of stagnation. While still not mainstream, the people who had this belief were still a loud and politically active bloc, and there was one person who truly capitalized on this bloc: Shinzo Abe. Shinzo Abe ran as Prime Minister of Japan from 2006 to 2007, and then in his second term, he ran from 2012 to 2020. He wasn't as nationalistic in his first term, but in his second, he really ramped up the nationalism, as can be seen in the phrase he adopted in his second term, Nippon Torimodosu, or in English, take back Japan.
世界をリードする技術力を持ち、豊かな教育を受け、誰もが安心して生活できる。それが本来の日本の姿です。取り戻す。取り戻す。取り戻す。日本を取り戻す。皆様と共に総力で自民党。
As an example of one of the laws he helped enact, I will look at one he passed in 2006, a revision to the Fundamental Law of Education. Originally passed in 1947, it was meant to establish the bedrock principles and mechanisms of the modern Japanese education system. The 2006 revision kept most of the original, but did change one article very drastically, Article 2. Now, the original Article 2 was very plain and a bit pompous. It goes, the aim of education, which is referring to Article 1, which establishes the aim of education, which is to develop the people's personality and spirits, shall be realized on all occasions and on all places. In order to achieve the aim, we shall endeavor to contribute to the creation and development of culture by mutual esteem and cooperation, respecting academic freedom, having a regard for actual life, and cultivating a spontaneous spirit. The revised Article 2 is way longer and is separated out into 5 objectives. The first 4 are rather similar to what the original Article 2 said. However, Article 5 is very interesting. Objective 5 is fostering the value of respect for tradition and culture and love of the country and regions that have nurtured us, as well as the value of respect for other countries and a desire to contribute to world peace and the development of the international community. Since this was a revision to the fundamental law of education, it let Shinzo Abe in his later terms get away with pushing his nationalistic ideas into Japan's education system. Though we'll put a pin in that for now, and we'll actually look at one of his most famous proposed laws, a revision to the Japanese Constitution. Now, he had ideas for many amendments to Japanese Constitution, most of which aiming to strengthen Japan and shake off a lot of its post-war concessions. However, his most famous is a revision to Article 9. Article 9 states that Japan gives up its right to declare war and also gives up its right to maintain a military. Now, Shinzo Abe's proposed amendment would have just formalized Japan's self-defense force, which is technically not an army, but in this revision, it would have been formally an army. Its self-defense force was created in the Cold War with the permission of the United States, just because of Cold War shenanigans. However, a referendum to actually change the Constitution of Japan was never actually held, and every subsequent LDP Prime Minister has also said they would hold a referendum to change the Constitution, but has yet to actually do so. However, there are other groups that do support a change of the Constitution, and they've tried to drum up public support by advertising and collecting signatures. And they've done it in some interesting places. Here's an article by Tawara Yoshifumi and Toyomi Yamaguchi as an example. At Shinto shrines all over Japan, the shops and donation boxes had signs exhorting worshippers to sign a petition calling for a constitutional revision. The petition stated, "I approve of revising the Constitution," at Nogi Shrine in Tokyo. There were banners displayed with such slogans as "Aiming for a Proud Japan" and "The Constitution is ours." Now, this would seem to be a violation of the separation of church and state, which the Shinto directive establishes precedent in Japan and is formalized in their laws. However, this probably didn't actually come from the government. It likely came as a collaboration between two very large and influential groups. The first group is Nippon Kaigi, a conservative advocacy group that was heavily associated with Shinto Abe's government. And they were also a large supporter of constitutional revision. After Abe revised the fundamental law of education and also made another change to educational law in 2014 that made it easier for local governments to intervene in what was taught in their schools and also what textbooks their schools had, Nippon Kaigi promoted textbooks that push their conservative ideology and their revisionist history into Japanese schools. And by revisionist history, I do mean that they claim that Japan committed no war crimes during World War II. The second organization is called the Shinto Seiji Renmei, abbreviated as SAS, and is the political arm of the Jinja Honsho, which is an association of 80,000 shrines from across Japan. They have associations with the LDP party, as evidenced by when they handed out flyers to LDP members about how homosexuality is a mental disease, and they also have close ties with Nippon Kaigi, as evidenced by the posters about constitutional revision in Shinto shrines. Now, with a view of how these three groups are working together, it becomes less so about is the government interfering in religion, which was the main purpose behind the Shinto directive, and now becomes a part of the broader question of is religion interfering too much in politics? And that is a question that many across the world are asking. Religions across the world are becoming more politically active. Religious institutions all over are becoming more entangled with politics and politicians. Now, how should we respond to this? I don't personally know. However, it is important to note that this is not just an issue for America or even just for Christianity. This is happening all over the world, even in the land of the rising sun.